November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. A man in a dark business suit walked into Portland International Airport and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. He paid $20 cash. He carried a briefcase. 2 hours later, he would jump from a Boeing 727 with $200,000 strapped to his body and vanish into the night sky over Washington state. He was never seen again. This is the only unsolved hijacking in United States history. This is the legend of D.B. Cooper. It was around 2:50 p.m. when Dan Cooper approached the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter. The ticket agent would later describe him as unremarkable. Mid-40s, average height and build. Dark hair combed back. Wearing a black raincoat over a dark suit, white shirt, and narrow black tie. He looked like a businessman. Calm, polite, forgettable. He booked seat 18C on Flight 305 to Seattle, a routine 30-minute hop up the coast. There were 36 other passengers on the plane that afternoon. Most were heading home for Thanksgiving. The flight attendants were preparing for what they thought would be an easy, quiet trip. Northwest Orient Flight 305 took off at 2:50 p.m. Everything seemed normal. The Boeing 727 climbed to 10,000 feet and leveled off for the short flight north. Passengers settled in. Some read newspapers, others looked out at the gray November sky. In seat 18C, Dan Cooper ordered a bourbon and soda. Then about 15 minutes into the flight, he did something that would change aviation history forever. He passed a note to Florence Schaffner, one of the flight attendants. She almost didn't read it. Flight attendants got notes from passengers all the time, usually phone numbers, dinner invitations. She assumed this was the same. But Cooper leaned toward her and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Florence Schaffner opened the note. It was written in neat, all-capital letters. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. You're being hijacked." She sat down next to him. Cooper opened his briefcase just enough for her to see inside. Red cylinders, wires, a battery. She saw what looked like 8 sticks of dynamite. He told her his demands. $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. His voice was calm, matter of fact. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't angry. He ordered another bourbon. Florence Schaffner walked to the cockpit and told the crew. The pilot, William Scott, radioed Seattle. He used the code word for hijacking. On the ground, the FBI went into action. Flight 305 circled over Puget Sound for nearly 2 hours, while authorities scrambled to meet Cooper's demands. The passengers didn't know they were being hijacked. The crew told them there was a minor mechanical delay. Cooper sat calmly in seat 18C, drinking bourbon and smoking cigarettes. Rally brand. Filter tips. On the ground, FBI agents raced to gather the money. Seattle First National Bank provided 10,000 $20 bills. Each bill's serial number was photographed and recorded. The parachutes were more difficult. The FBI retrieved 2 back parachutes and 2 reserve chutes from a local skydiving school. One of the back parachutes was a military surplus chute. Older, cone-shaped. Not ideal for jumping. One of the reserve chutes was actually a dummy trainer. It had been sewn shut. It couldn't be opened. No one thought Cooper would actually jump. It was suicide. They were over rugged wilderness. It was raining, freezing cold, nearly dark. 10,000 feet up. No one jumps from a commercial jet and survives. At 5:24 p.m., Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Cooper's instructions were specific. The plane would taxi to a remote area. The stairs would be brought to the rear door. One person would bring the money in parachutes, no tricks, no FBI agents rushing the plane. If anyone tried anything, he would detonate the bomb. The airline cooperated completely. A Northwest Orient employee named Al Lee approached the aircraft alone, carrying a canvas bank bag with the money and the 4 parachutes. Cooper allowed all 36 passengers to leave, then most of the crew. Only the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant remained. Florence Schaffner was allowed to leave. Before she left, Cooper handed her the note. His demands, the evidence, she should have kept it. Instead, she would later say she threw it away. The only physical evidence of his demands was gone. Cooper examined the money. He checked the parachutes. He kept the 2 back chutes and 1 of the reserve chutes. The dummy trainer with the sewn-shut canopy, the one that couldn't open, no one knows why he chose that one. Then he gave new instructions. The plane would take off and fly to Mexico City. They would fly low, below 10,000 feet. The rear air stair would remain unlocked. The cabin would stay unpressurized. The crew would stay in the cockpit with the door closed. At 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off again, heading south. Dan Cooper was alone in the back of the plane with $200,000 and 3 parachutes. What happened next, no one saw. The flight plan called for a course toward Reno, Nevada, then on to Mexico City. But Cooper never intended to make it to Mexico. The crew felt a pressure change at 8 p.m. An indicator light showed that the rear air stair had been activated. The air stair was a set of stairs built into the rear of the Boeing 727. It could be lowered in flight. Boeing would later change this design because of Cooper. The plane's tail dipped slightly. The crew struggled to maintain altitude. Someone had opened the rear door. The pilot tried to communicate with Cooper over the intercom. No response. At 8:13 p.m., the crew felt another jolt, a change in air pressure. The plane's tail bounced upward slightly. Something heavy had left the aircraft. The crew believed Cooper had jumped. They continued flying according to his instructions. They didn't know if he was still on board. They didn't know if the bomb was real. They landed in Reno at 10:15 p.m. Police and FBI agents surrounded the plane, guns drawn. They found the aircraft empty. 2 parachutes remained on board, the reserve chutes. One of them was the dummy trainer. It had been cut open. The shroud lines were missing. Cooper had used a knife to cut open the sewn-shut parachute and taken the cords. The money bag was gone. The back parachute was gone. And Dan Cooper was gone. Somewhere over the wilderness of southwestern Washington state on a cold, rainy November night, a man had jumped from a Boeing 727 at 10,000 feet with $200,000 strapped to his body. The temperature outside the aircraft was 7 degrees below zero. It was raining hard. Visibility was near zero. The plane was traveling at approximately 200 miles per hour. He was wearing a business suit, dress shoes, a thin raincoat, no helmet, no jumpsuit, no gloves. He had a briefcase, a heavy bag of cash, a parachute he'd never tested. Professional skydivers said it was suicide. Even if the parachute opened, the conditions were impossible. The landing zone was dense forest, mountains, the Columbia River. It was pitch black. He couldn't see the ground. but the FBI had to assume he survived. The largest manhunt in American history began. The FBI called the investigation NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. They tried to calculate where Cooper jumped. The flight path, the speed, the wind, the trajectory. They estimated he jumped somewhere over the Cascade Mountains near the town of Ariel, Washington, just north of the Columbia River. The search area was massive, dense forest, rugged terrain. The FBI brought in helicopters, search dogs, and hundreds of agents. They found nothing. No parachute, no body, no money, no briefcase, no trace of Dan Cooper. The investigation expanded. The FBI interviewed hundreds of suspects. There was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., who hijacked a plane just 5 months later using an almost identical method. He was caught, imprisoned, and later killed in a shootout with FBI agents. But the Bureau ruled him out as Cooper. Different fingerprints, different physical description. There was Kenneth Christensen, a Northwest Orient employee and former paratrooper. He had the skills, the opportunity. After 1971, he suddenly had money, but the evidence was circumstantial. There was Robert Rackstraw, a former Army helicopter pilot with Special Forces training. He had parachute experience, a criminal record, a history of con jobs, but he was never charged. There was Barbara Dayton, one of the few female suspects. She'd been a pilot, a parachutist. She claimed on her deathbed that she was Cooper, but the FBI found no evidence. And there was Dwayne Weber, who told his wife on his deathbed, "I'm Dan Cooper." He knew details about the hijacking that weren't public, but DNA tests were inconclusive. The FBI investigated more than 800 suspects. They cleared every single one. The case went cold. And then, in 1980, 9 years after the hijacking, a boy made a discovery. 8-year-old Brian Ingram was on a family camping trip along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. He was digging in the sand to build a fire pit when his hand hit something. Bundles of rotting $20 bills. The serial numbers matched. It was Cooper's money, $5,800. Still bound in rubber bands, badly deteriorated. Some bills were stuck together, some had disintegrated, but it was there, on the banks of the Columbia River, buried in the sand. The FBI dredged the river. They searched the area for weeks. They found nothing else, no more money, no parachute, no body, no explanation for how the money got there. Did Cooper land in the river and drown? Did he bury the money and escape? Did the money wash downstream from somewhere else? No one knows. The case remained open for 45 years. In 2016, the FBI officially closed the investigation. They didn't solve it. They just stopped actively investigating. The file is still open. If credible evidence appears, they'll reopen it. But after half a century, the truth seems lost to history. So what really happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he survive the jump? Professional skydivers say it's nearly impossible. The conditions, the equipment, the speed, the darkness, the terrain. If he survived the jump and landing, could he have walked out of the wilderness in a business suit and dress shoes, in freezing rain, with a briefcase and a heavy bag of money, without proper gear, without a map or compass? It seems unlikely. The most probable scenario is that Dan Cooper died that night. He hit the ground too hard, or he landed in the river and drowned, or he died of hypothermia in the forest. Somewhere in the mountains of Washington state, There may be a skeleton in a business suit with a parachute and a bag of rotting $20 bills, but there's no proof. Some believe he survived, that he planned it perfectly, that he had help on the ground, that he walked away with the money and lived out his life in secret. The money found in 1980 raises more questions than it answers. How did it get there? Why was it buried? Why wasn't all of it recovered? Over 50 years later, we still don't know. We don't know if Dan Cooper was his real name. We don't know where he came from. We don't know if he had military training or parachute experience. We don't know his motive. The media called him D.B. Cooper. That was a mistake. A reporter confused him with another suspect early in the investigation. The name stuck. But Dan Cooper is who he said he was. Or maybe that was fake too. He never hurt anyone. He was polite to the crew. He let all the passengers go. When the hijacking was over, he thanked the flight attendant. He became a folk hero. The man who beat the system, the gentleman bandit, the only hijacker in American history who was never caught. But he probably didn't beat the system. He probably died in the woods. The legend lives on because we want to believe he made it. We want to believe the impossible is possible. We want to believe someone can outsmart the FBI, jump from a plane at night and vanish into legend. That's the power of a mystery with no ending. Today, you can't do what D.B. Cooper did. After his hijacking, the FAA made major changes. Metal detectors in airports, X-ray machines for luggage. Boeing modified the 727 so the rear air stair couldn't be opened in flight. They call it the Cooper vein. Dan Cooper changed aviation forever. But 53 years later, we still don't know who he really was. Was he a desperate man who gambled everything on an impossible escape? Or was he a calculated criminal who pulled off the perfect crime? Did he die in the wilderness? Or is he out there somewhere, living under a new name with a secret only he knows? We may never know the truth, but somewhere over the forests of Washington state, on a cold November night in 1971, a man jumped from a plane and became a legend. The legend of D.B. Cooper, the man who disappeared into the sky.